Okay, we'll start with this. On the heels of a big win this past weekend over the reigning WBA flyweight champion Naoko Fujioka, Marlen Esparza says she wants more gold. I really want the next two belts, as there are two remaining champions to take on in the flyweight division.
Both are from Argentina.
Long-reigning IBF champion Leonela Paula Yudica and newly crowned WBO champion Tamara DeMarco. Tamara, she gave Ana E. Lopez her first professional loss and pried that WBO title away from her. I've heard no mention, no news of a potential rematch between them. Tamara DeMarco might be someone of interest for Marlen Esparza, since she's looking to get right back in there and unify. Marlen Esparza, who said, "I thought it was a really good performance considering how hard she brings it."
In reference to her performance against Naoko Fujioka.
You know, those judges, they had it a lot wider than I did. I actually had it a draw with one swing round. You swing that swing round to Marlen, then she wins by a point.
It's not Marlen winning that I took issue with.
That's how the judges scored it. Better still, Marlen said she's a very seasoned fighter. She's a world champion. I'm proud we did everything we practiced. Me and my coach, James Cooper, we really executed well, and we expected it to go that way. You don't know what a world champion can bring. We had to be patient and see what she had to bring to the table. It wasn't tough because of the punches, but more because she was smothering. I'm really just grateful I could have this experience, not only for women's boxing, but for my fans, and really solidify the division. I really want the next two belts. La Bonita from Argentina is the one I want, but I have to let my team decide what's next. I'm happy for the future.
So far, so good for Marlen Esparza.
Not the most convincing victory over then reigning WBC champion Beth Zamora Silva. A little bit more convincing with Naoko Fujioka, though all the same, I think the judges had it far too wide, and the implications of that.
It takes away from the victory.
That the judges' scorecards didn't necessarily reflect the way the contest looked and how close the fight was. I mean, if they would have had Marlen winning by a round...
Well, closer you couldn't complain, but...
You know, Marlen Esparza is now the flyweight division's unified lineal and ring magazine champion. She is the authority at 112 pounds.
Emerging at number 7 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list.
Because Marlen Esparza was able to weather the storm with Naoko Fujioka, Naoko, who's got a great engine, throws punches in bunches. Naoko can punch. There's mustard on those shots. Because Marlen was able to make it through that, for better or worse, you could actually give her decent odds to beat Tamara DeMarco. You could actually give her decent odds to perhaps unseat long-reigning champion Leonela Paula Yudica, the longest reigning champion in today's flyweight division. She's been IBF champion since 2014.
That's 8 fucking years.
9 official defenses of the IBF title she procured way back when in 2014. She's only a year older than Marlen.
Marlen's 32.
Leonela's 33. Neither Marlen, Leonela, or Tamara DeMarco can be accused of being concussive punchers, one-hitter quitter kind of fighters. No, far from it. Leonela has no recorded knockouts, and neither does Tamara DeMarco. Marlen, she's only got one.
Marlen and either of these fighters are fights that likely go to the cards.
And if it goes to the cards, you guys know how it goes. For better or worse, Marlen Esparza stands a decent enough chance of becoming this division's undisputed champion.
When it comes to Marlen's stablemate,
the only woman to have officially beaten Marlen in the pro ranks. When it comes to two-division champion Seniesa Estrada,
the story is Seniesa is very much disgruntled with Golden Boy Promotions.
Which isn't a hard conclusion to come to if you took a trip over to her Instagram stories, where she tagged Oscar De La Hoya several times as the fight fans asked her incessantly, when was she going to get back out there? When's the next time we can expect to see her fight?
She described Golden Boy Promotions as being unprofessional as fuck,
citing discrepancies in pay that she expects to get back out there when she's paid what she deserves. 22 professional victories, no losses, no draws, 9 knockouts.
A two-division champion who's easy on the eyes,
delivers the knockouts, is always in exciting fights, even when they happen to go to the cards.
What the hell's going on between Seniesa and Golden Boy?
Seniesa Estrada is clearly disgruntled with Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions, who she tagged several times, and it's not hard to see what it is she's disgruntled about. Late last year, there was talk of getting Seniesa out there at minimum weight to unify titles with Costa Rica's own Yo Costa Valle. And I have it on good authority that Yo Costa Valle priced herself out of that fight.
Which comes as no surprise to me. I never believed Yo Costa would go through with it.
Yo Costa Valle, the minimum weight division's reigning IBF champion of Costa Rica, who was in action earlier this year against Sana Hazuki, who she fought for a second time, though I don't know why. She already beat Sana Hazuki last year.
She was her mandatory last year.
She fought her as a voluntary this year, instead of unifying titles with Seniesa Estrada. I knew when I saw that fight that heralded trouble in paradise, that the unification match between her and Seniesa must have hit a snag somewhere. And based on inside intel that's been communicated to me, Yokasta Valle may have very well priced herself out of this fight, coupled with the rift that Seniesa has between herself, her team, and Golden Boy Promotions.
Trouble in paradise.
And that's why we haven't seen Seniesa return to action 4 months into the year of 2022.
She capped off last year with a highlight reel knockout over then unbeaten Maria Santizo.
Dropped the hard 2 times and stopped her in 4 rounds, and you would have thought that Golden Boy Promotions would have made it a priority.
Hey, Seniesa, what she's wife and get her back out there.
She's got serious star power, but I fear that Seniesa Estrada has gone about as far as she can go with Golden Boy Promotions, because Golden Boy Promotions ain't got all the same resources as a Top Rank, as a Matchroom. You ask me what I think the future might hold for Seniesa Estrada. I think she might end up leaving Golden Boy Promotions. I think she might. But I don't think she'll be stuck in limbo. She's too good a fighter for that. I think she might end up being released from Golden Boy Promotions and potentially may end up crossing over to Matchroom.
Yeah, that's what I think is going to end up happening.
I think very soon news might break that Seniesa crosses over to the Matchroom side of things, and the next time we see her, she may very well be a Matchroom fighter. We saw her not that long ago doing commentator work on Golden Boy Promotions' show.
But she's clearly unhappy there.
Thus, Seniesa may be looking for a change in decorum, and I think she may end up at Matchroom. That's what I think. In men's heavyweight news, a surprising revelation. It has been announced that Andy Ruiz Jr., former unified heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz, will face Tyrone Spong in a heavyweight clash on July 16th, south of the border in Mexico, as part of a Triller promotion.
Well, they're headlining.
This will be the show's main event, an event that will be hosted by So You Think You Can Dance's Nigel Lithgow. You heard that right. Nigel Lithgow from So You Think You Can Dance. He's going to be this event's host.
Triller ain't all the way out of boxing.
They're not. We know that things went sideways for them when it came to the Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos Jr. fight. They were found in default.
But that hasn't stopped them from staging fights.
That whole triad combat experiment where they got guys fighting in that trigon, a ring shaped like a slice of pizza.
Michael Hunter and Jerry Forrest had a rematch on Triller.
Now Kubrat Pulev's going to be taking on that same Jerry Forrest on the undercard of Sergey Kovalev's big ring return against Kubrat Pulev's little brother, Tervel Pulev, in the cruiserweight division.
That bad experience with Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos, the IBF.
It hasn't stopped Triller from trying to make their own unique contribution to the sport of boxing, and this will be just the latest addition. You've got Kovalev versus Pulev in May, and Ruiz versus Spong.
That's set to go down south of the border in July.
I got so many thoughts on this thing because everyone was expecting Andy Ruiz Jr. to take on Luis Ortiz.
I was.
Over there on the PBC side of things as part of what most anticipated would be a pay-per-view, the same way the Chris Arreola fight was a pay-per-view, the same way the Ortiz versus Martin fight was a pay-per-view. We were seeing a severe lack of quality control from the PBC's heavyweight stable.
Well, what kind of fights were ending up on pay-per-view?
Since none of those fights were deemed as being pay-per-view worthy. If you want to come back against Chris Arreola, you can do that, but you ought to do that on regular Fox, not a pay-per-view. And the same applies to Luis Ortiz and Charles Martin. It turned out to be an entertaining little fight, it did, but it wasn't a fight that ever belonged behind a paywall.
Now, if Andy's fighting Tyrone Spong,
that means he's not fighting Luis Ortiz the way everyone expected him to. So where does that leave Luis Ortiz?
doesn't have very many options over there.
Deontay Wilder is all but a semi-retired fighter. Not that it matters because he's already been knocked out by him 2 times. He just beat Charles Martin. Adam Kovnowski's supposed to be in talks to take on Derek Chisoria over there on the Matchroom DAZN side of things.
I don't think anybody expected Andy to cross over to Triller.
That makes it twice as strange that Andy Ruiz Jr. ended up on Triller of all places. You know, having seen this, you get the sense that perhaps Triller is a potential destination for Jarrell Miller. Unbeaten Jarrell Miller, whose ban is set to be lifted very soon.
Triller's too much of a social pariah for Matchroom or Top Rank to do business with him.
I don't know how you'd feel about jumping into bed with Probellum. Not that beggars can be choosy, they can't. But one potential destination for Jarrell Miller is Triller. Kubrat Pulev's over there, Jerry Forrest, Michael Hunter, now Andy Ruiz and Tyrone Spong.
What do I think about this fight?
Tyrone Spong, you might be familiar with that name. Tyrone Spong was supposed to take on Alexander Usyk approximately 2 years ago, but he tested positive for a banned substance, and we haven't seen him since. He was last in action in August of 2019, and that way, this is a guy who hasn't fought in a little over 2 years.
Very decorated kickboxer who crossed over into boxing.
That's what he is. I've seen him in action, and for what it's worth, when he was in action, he looked a promising fighter. Interesting. Somebody who could make things interesting depending who's opposite the ring of him. Real knockout power and combat proficient.
Albeit very inactive now.
Gotta be honest with you, I know it's not Luis Ortiz, but I actually like this fight more than I like that fight. You heard that right. Tyrone Spong is a younger guy than Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz is in his 40s. He's been stopped 2 times, and he got dropped 2 times in his last fight, whereas Tyrone Spong sports a professional record of 14 wins, no losses, no draws, 13 knockouts. He's won 13 out of his 14 fights by way of knockout. And I understand that he's been inactive for the last 2 years or so.
Still a step up from a Chris Arreola fight.
For my money, it's actually a more intriguing matchup than Ruiz versus Old Man Ortiz. I don't even think Old Man Ortiz ought to be fighting anymore. That guy's getting up there in age.
Was the PBC's heavyweight stable starting to unravel?
I really don't know. Last we heard, Deontay Wilder was supposed to be taking some kind of psychotropic, psychedelic tea to help him make a decision as to whether or not he wants to retire. We were expecting Andy Ruiz to take on Luis Ortiz, but as it stands, Andy's on the Triller side of things, and that leaves Luis Ortiz in limbo, who's up there in age anyway.
That guy's old. He gets prostate exams.
Just gonna come right out and say it. This is a better fight. This is a better, more interesting fight for my money than that fight would have been. And that fight, it wouldn't have been a bad fight, but I view this fight as being better.
Andy Ruiz is 32 years old. The Tyrone Spong was 36.
Yeah, Tyrone Spong's a few years older than Andy, but comparatively, he takes better care of himself. You say that Tyrone Spong, he hasn't been active the last 2 years. Well, Andy Ruiz hasn't been all that active the last 2 years either. He's only boxed once, and that was against Chris Arreola.
Tail of the tape, they're evenly matched.
Not much between them, both 6'2" with a 74-inch wingspan. That kind of dynamic, 2 guys like that being at eye level, having the same sweet spot, mid-range to inside, it has all the makings of what could really be an entertaining fight.
They've sparked my curiosity. What else are they going to put on this card?
Is the well running dry over there on PBC Island, at least for their heavyweights? What left Andy Ruiz Jr. feeling so inclined to take his business elsewhere?
Because I wouldn't call this a lighter touch.
This isn't what I'd call a takeover, you know?
I gotta admit, I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
I honestly believe this is a better fight than that fight would have been. And finally, Probellum released an official statement in reference to the ongoing sanctions levied against Daniel Kinahan, members of his family, and his associates. Probellum stated, Probellum takes the sanctions made by the United States Treasury extremely seriously, and the business and its employees will be fully compliant with them. We have retained counsel in the United States to ensure that we fully comply with all rules, regulations, and requirements related to this matter, including not working with any individual or company that has been placed under U.S. sanctions. This includes Daniel Kinahan, and we can confirm that we will not have any business relationship or communication with him whatsoever. Bob Arum's comments implying that Top Rank has ceased a business relationship with Probellum are baseless. Top Rank is a competitor, and since Probellum's inception, Top Rank has never worked directly with us. Any suggestions that Daniel Kinahan is a shareholder or owner of Probellum are false and defamatory.
Well, that's one way to put it.
Look, I told you guys in my previous video, while a lot of people feel that Daniel Kinahan is in any way, shape, or form involved in Probellum.
With them.
Clandestinely, behind the scenes. Officially, on paper, he's got nothing to do with them.
Probellum is supposed to be helmed by Richard Schaefer.
And the connection that people are making between Daniel Kinahan and Probellum really pertains to the MTK Global Fighters that fight under the Probellum banner, and how many people suspect that Daniel Kinahan is still associated with MTK, even though
MTK CEO Sandra Vaughn stated in 2020.
Daniel Kinahan is not associated with MTK Global anymore. The connection that people are making is a tenuous connection at best.
I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I just know that officially MTK says they're not involved with Daniel Kinahan.
And he's not involved with them. So when connecting the dots, connecting Daniel Kinahan by way of MTK to Probellum. One must be mindful that both Probellum and MTK...
They both said it ain't got nothing to do with Daniel Kinahan.
That's the tune everybody's singing now. Very recently, Mick Conlon, he stated he wanted his image removed from MTK Global's website. Jamel Herring stated that he parted ways with MTK Global after the Shakur-Stevenson fight.
This was expected. Everybody's covering their ass.
Because that was the point. That was the point of the sanctions. That's the point of the $5 million bounty for any intel that might lead to an arrest and a conviction in connection to Daniel Kinahan and his family members, his associates. That's what it's all about. Turning him into a hot potato, a social pariah that nobody wants to do business.
Nobody wants to do business with this guy publicly.
United States citizens, least of all, while he's being sanctioned by the United States. The kicker is, anybody doing a whole lot of business with Daniel Kinahan?
Anybody that has been doing business with him likely hasn't been doing it publicly anyway.
You know how it goes. Now, whether this was Bob Arum just saying what we're all thinking, or it was a Freudian slip, and he actually knows something about Probellum that we don't know.
Because officially, Daniel Kinahan was never linked to Probellum.
Bob kind of threw Probellum under the bus with his statement that Top Rank isn't going to be working with MTK Global and Probellum anymore, as if to imply that these separate entities, these companies, are somehow still linked to Daniel Kinahan. Thus, the people at Probellum thought it prudent to disassociate themselves with Daniel the same way Bob has disassociated himself with them.
And Daniel.
And MTK, make no mistake, the heat is on. They're trying their best to make things difficult for Daniel, make it difficult for him to stick his head out of the sand, make it difficult for him to do any kind of business at all.
But I just told you that's what they were going to do.
Ultimately, the sanctions themselves are not evidence, are not proof of foul play. They're not. And it's going to take more than that to get the UAE to cooperate and get the guy extradited, because that's the end game after all. Being able to get them on board, to get this guy out of the UAE.
Don't forget that for all the accusations levied against this guy, he's never been prosecuted.
He has never been convicted of anything he's been accused of.
So it's either he's very slippery or he's innocent.
I'll leave such judgments up to you. The saga continues.
Grab a chair.